Today we are at a vintage market called Picker Place here in Ybor City. We're going to go in here and check out this vintage market, which happens once a month, kind of like American Pickers. They go out all month and pick items and come in here on the second weekend of the month and let you browse and shop. So let's go inside and check this out, and that's coming at you right now. I am now inside the Picker Place, and it is a very large warehouse building full of all kinds of artifacts that they have picked over the whole month, and they come in here and have it on display for you to browse through and shop and buy. And as you first come in, they have a little tiki thing going on here with some Bacardi rum and a little shell there to get your party going, and it's like some old vintage milk bottles. Here's some really cool items. Here's an old vintage sewing machine. They got 30 bucks on that. That's a pretty vintage looking machine right there. Up here is a bunch of vintage thermoses. There's a whole bunch of thermoses. There's a little fat thermos, water cooler. A lot of unique items in here. And they do have it each set up in little areas and kind of decoratively displayed, not just a little flea market type thing with just stuff to look through, but it's kind of displayed kind of very nicely. Here's an old Schwinn bicycle. That's a classic right there. An old Schwinn bicycle. Absolutely incredible. Here's a very nice vintage looking carousel type horse on a stand for $59, and that's a good buy. Here is a vintage manual type typewriter that they have here. It's a Smith Corona. It's in the case and everything. Well, if you've lost your balls, right here you can find some vintage billiard balls. And they got a whole box of vintage billiard balls here for $22.95. Well, crap. And I do say, well, crap. Well, crap. There's a front end of a car right here underneath this table. Here is another vintage typewriter for $45. It's made by Underwood. And it's in a case, and it's in pretty good condition as well. A lot of vintage typewriters here. Here's an old toy typewriter by Buddy L for $17 for a child. That's some old school stuff right there. Now right here is a classic little stool that has the Mickey Mouse Club logo on it, and it is an authentic original. It looks like a little child's stool. It says the Mickey Mouse Club on it. They even have a tourist trap mannequin here. See, it's got Gigi shades there, and definitely dressed up like a tourist. And maybe that's the way we should dress like this here when we go out. They have some metal tins here. Here's an old Ritz Crackers metal tin, and I remember this here metal circus tin here. That's kind of classic. Here are some vintage candlesticks and candlesticks holders. They have a whole bunch of candlestick holders here, all different shapes, sizes, and there's a old-time cutlery set as well, all in the box. Here's a pretty cool looking vintage bird cage, kind of made out of wood, wicker wood here. And here on this table is another vintage bird cage. That's pretty cool looking. That looks like something you might see on like the old Tom and Jerry cartoons, or probably Tweety Bird from Looney Tunes. There is even a photograph here of some family. I guess if you don't have one, you can adopt a family here by getting this 8x10. All kinds of little knickknacks here in this shop. Just so much to look at, and the items will change every month. Here looks like an Easter basket for that record head, and you got a little peaches and herb there going on, and it says, "I will watch over you," and I am watching over this basket right here. Looks like they got some classic bingo cards here with some prizes and things from way back in the day. And over here are some old gas station maps from Exxon and Texaco. Looks like it's in North Carolina and South Carolina maps. And you used to give those away free at the gas stations. I think you have to purchase those now, but not too many people use those maps anymore with the GPS. Here is an old vintage Sony radio way back in the day, and a vintage alarm clock here. Almost like one of those old slimline phones. Here's a whole box of very vintage tools. There's a big wrench and all kinds of items. They look like they have seen better days. Up here are some vintage gasoline cans, and those look like those have seen some better days as well. Here's an interesting horseshoe thing you can hang on your wall. I guess maybe you could put some potted plants or flowers down in that. And here is a wagon wheel type wall decoration that you could put some flowers and stuff down in. That's kind of rustic looking. Now this is quite interesting here. This big lamp here is actually a big tin barrel, and they got a light up in it. Imagine putting that in your kitchen. Barrels of fun. I have found some vintage movie reels, probably used at an old cinema or something, but you can put those on your wall and do a little entertainment room type decor. Now this right here is a very vintage Kodak movie camera from way back in the day, probably back in the 50s or 60s. My dad had a vintage one that wasn't quite this old, and I still have it. But that is a vintage old Super 8 movie camera. Here is another one of those vintage type sewing machines in the old case. This looks exactly like the one my grandmother had, and I used to have it, and I gave it away to my cousin. And it's got the old foot press down there where you press to start the bobbing needle and everything. She made a mini African and quilt with her old Singer sewing machine, and this one's definitely vintage. It does look just like the one that she had that I once owned. They do have a lot of tables and chairs for your kitchen and stuff in here. Some vintage looking glass tabletops, and also the wood ones, the wooden type tables. If you're needing the kitchen table, this might be a good spot. And I have found some 8-track tapes. I used to have a whole bunch of these and I got rid of them. No one uses the 8-tracks, but I grew up, had an 8-track player in our car, and those are some vintage 8-track tapes right there. This here looks like a bunch of kitchen items. Here's an old-fashioned beater right here you've mashed in potatoes up with, and over here is a very vintage electric mixer, and that is a classic right there for sure. Here once again are some more vintage gasoline cans. Back here's an old vintage gasoline can for sure. Haven't seen one of those in years. And this place is located in Ybor City, home of Cuban cigars, so they do have a big selection here of Cuban cigar boxes. If you're into collecting cigar boxes, they have a bunch here. Here is a vintage old railroad light that you would see alongside the railroad tracks. I actually have a light, but it's was on a caboose. Now this you gotta love. This is a vintage Coca-Cola machine back when it was 10 cents. I think it says 10, no, it was a quarter, 10-cent deposit. $500 for this vintage machine. You used to pull the little door out and grab your Coke bottle. Gosh, I remember doing that when I was very little. And this right here is one of those vintage popcorn poppers that you would put out on the open fire. So if you're a camper, you could put that popcorn in there and pop it. Over here is another vintage radio. Almost looks like the one from Gilligan's Island, but not quite. I think theirs was white, but that does have that classic look. They have a big light up hospitality sign here. So if you're in the hospitality industry, they got a little drink cart going on here and a wine rack, which is pretty cool. And they got more wine stuff and wine decor over this way here with shaker bottles and glasses. All kinds of cool stuff here. Looks like you can buy the whole bar here. You can buy the bar and the bar stools right here together with a little harp lager bottle to set up on top of it. They got it set up here really nicely. And as you can see, this is a very, very big shop, and there's a lot of people looking around in here, and they do change this merchandise up every month, and it is the second weekend of every month they will have new items. They do have a lot of decor items, Florida type decor items, as you can see here on the wall. This right here is a very artistic looking fish. It looks like the big fish is eating the next fish, and that fish is eating another fish. And Pretty cool little artwork. You could probably get that and put that out in your yard. And if you're looking for some classic vintage dishware, they have a lot to look at here. All different colors, all different styles from years ago. Some of these my grandmother, I believe, had. Here is one of those vintage Chinese changing walls. You could change clothes behind. That's pretty cool. I had a friend who she had that in her living room way back in the day. Well, Picker Place here in Ybor City is a very large vintage market that is held once a month on the second weekend of the month, and this just happens to be the weekend for July. The next market is on August 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th, so definitely come down here and check out all their new items next month. And also here on site they have a food truck that you can get your food and get something to eat while you're here, browsing and shopping for these pretty cool antiques that they pick all month long. Well, that was my little trip here to the Picker Place antique vintage market here in Ybor City, and it happens once a month here in Ybor City at this here big warehouse. Lots of stuff to look at in here. I could look forever. I found so much cool stuff in there. There's a lot of people in here looking. It's like a 4-day event from Thursday to Sunday on the second weekend of every month. Unfortunately, tomorrow's the last day, which will be Sunday here in July. But the next one will kick off in August. I'm going to have a link in the description for their Facebook page, so you can check them out, see when their next market is going to be. And remember to go out there, make it a great day, because you deserve it.